During the end-of-year salary review meeting, I said, I'm really excited about this raise. I've earned it. I'd been at it nonstop for months, opening two new locations in the North End, and Beacon Hill revamping the menu to bring in younger crowds, negotiating with suppliers when costs skyrocketed, training dozens of new hires, turning red numbers black on both spots. It was my time. My dad, Norman Russell, CEO of Russell Family Trattoria, didn't even look up from his espresso. He let out a short chuckle. "What raise?" he said flatly. "We gave it to Blake." I stared at him. My mom, Gloria, who runs HR and finances, gave a small nod and pushed a folder across the oak table we'd had since Grandpa's days. The top page was clear: salary increase approval. Blake Russell. Full bonus title bump to operations lead, everything I'd been building toward. Blake, my younger brother, leaned back in his chair with that easy smile he's always had. "Oops," he said, shrugging like it was nothing. "Forgot to mention it, Shane. My bad." The private dining room we use for family meetings went dead silent. The kind of silence that presses in where nobody wants to admit what just happened. Not anger, not shock, just awkward avoidance. I didn't yell. I didn't beg for an explanation. I stood up slowly, buttoned my jacket, and walked out. Back in my office overlooking the kitchen of the original location, I packed the few things that were really mine: laptop, the leather-bound notebook full of expansion plans I'd written at 2 a.m., the keys to the new sites, the group photo from the Beacon Hill grand opening, the one where I'm standing front and center with the staff I hired and trained. I left the company jacket on the chair. I left the nameplate on the door. No one came after me. No one called my name down the hallway. I walked out of the building that had been in our family for 3 generations and didn't look back. But here's the thing: they didn't realize I hadn't been working blindly. I had records of everything. Every email chain proving the new menu concepts were mine. Every supplier contract I fought for. Every revenue report showing the growth from the locations I ran. My name is Shane Russell. And from wherever you're watching this, stay with me all the way to the end, because you've never seen a family business fallout quite like the one that came next. It left everyone in Boston's restaurant scene absolutely stunned. If you want to know how tables can turn when blood isn't thicker than business, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below saying family drama so I know you're here for the full story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happened when the receipts finally came due. 2 weeks went by without a single call or text from anyone in the family. I stayed in my apartment in the North End, just a few blocks from the original trattoria. At first, the silence felt like a weight on my chest, the kind that makes it hard to breathe when you realize your own blood chose someone else over you. I kept replaying the numbers in my head: 40% revenue jump at the Beacon Hill location, 28. At the new one in Back Bay, supplier costs I'd brought down by 15% across the board. All of it documented, all of it traceable to me. But no one reached out. Not Dad, not Mom, not even Blake, pretending to care. That's when the hurt started turning into something colder. I opened my laptop and began pulling everything together. I had years of email threads showing the menu changes I'd proposed and implemented, the ones that brought in the younger crowd and doubled weekend reservations. I downloaded every financial report I'd submitted, the ones that tracked daily sales, labor costs, inventory turns. I found the voice memos from late-night strategy sessions where I laid out expansion plans while Blake was still finishing his business degree. Then I remembered the family confidentiality agreement they'd tried to update 2 years ago. Everyone else signed the revised version that covered new locations and supplier deals. I never did. I'd been too busy running the day-to-day to sit through another meeting about protecting the legacy. They never followed up. That oversight was now my advantage. I created a secure folder and started organizing it, all screenshots of Slack messages, where I'd asked Blake to review numbers he later presented as his own analysis contracts with local farms I'd negotiated for organic produce that became our selling point: staff training manuals I wrote from scratch. Every late night, every weekend spent tasting new recipes with the chefs, every supplier call I took at midnight when shipments were delayed, it was all there. By the end of the second week, I had a timeline that left no doubt who had driven the growth everyone was celebrating. I backed it up to 3 different drives and the cloud. I wasn't planning to disappear quietly like they clearly expected. The pain was still there sharp when I thought about holidays at the house in Revere, or Sunday sauce at Mom's table, but it had direction now. I wasn't going to let them rewrite the story with me as the invisible older brother who just helped out. They'd made a choice in that meeting, and I was making mine. I closed the laptop, looked out at the quiet street below, and knew exactly what came next. I wasn't walking away defeated. I was arming up. The next morning, I got a reply from Dad. Different tone. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee going cold and drafted the email I'd been thinking about for days. Subject line: final request for proper attribution and compensation. The body was short: professional, no emotion. A list of specific contributions attached samples of reports and emails, and a clear deadline for correction before I took further steps. I hit send to Norman Russell's work address and copied the main family account. His response came within hours. The usual confident tone was gone. He suggested we hop on a call or meet in person at the original location to clear things up. No apology, just urgency wrapped in concern. I replied with one line: no meetings. Correct the record in writing by end of week. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Blake. Hey man, really sorry about how that went down. Wasn't trying to make it personal. You know, I've always looked up to you. Let's grab a beer and talk it out. Followed by a couple of emojis like nothing had changed since we were kids. I read it twice. The fake casualness made my jaw tighten. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the secure folder, selected a handful of the clearest pieces, supplier negotiation emails where Blake had asked me to clean up the numbers so they look sharper for the meeting revenue breakdowns he'd copied into his own slides without changes, and attached them to 2 new messages. The first went to the 2 minority investors who'd put money into the last 2 locations. They weren't family, just local business guys Dad had brought in for capital. I kept it factual. For transparency, here are documents showing origination of recent growth initiatives, now attributed elsewhere. The second went to an old contact at Marino Group, the bigger Italian chain expanding across New England. We'd met at industry events. He'd once tried to recruit me. Subject: potential discussion. The attachment was the same set plus a 1-page summary of what I'd built over the past 3 years. I hit send on both and turned off notifications. By evening, the first signs showed up. Dad called 3 times. I let it ring. Mom sent a text asking if I was okay and if I'd come to Sunday dinner. I left it on read. The following day, a mutual friend in the North End supplier network messaged me. Heard some weird stuff about credit on the new spots. Everything good at Russell's? I didn't reply, but I knew the ripple had started. Over the next few days, more messages trickled in from chefs' managers, even a couple of longtime servers. Questions phrased carefully, but the same thread: something about Blake's new title not matching what everyone saw on the floor. Word was getting around that the numbers presented at the last family meeting didn't add up the way they'd been told. I stayed quiet and watched it spread through the tight Boston restaurant community where everyone knows everyone else's business within a week. The panic was starting to show. A couple of weeks later, the whispers turned into an official review. One of the minority investors called Dad directly and requested a formal look at the attribution of the recent growth numbers. They wanted documentation on who originated the initiatives tied to the new locations and supplier relationships. Dad had no choice but to agree and loop in an outside accountant they sometimes used for tax season. The process took 10 days. They pulled meeting notes from the shared drive, cross-checked presentation decks against submission dates, reviewed staff feedback forms from the past year. The accountant compiled everything into a report and presented it in a closed session with Dad, Mom, Blake, and the 2 investors. The findings were straightforward. Blake's contributions were mostly administrative follow-ups and attendance at events. The core strategies: site selection for expansions, vendor switches that cut costs, staffing models that reduced turnover, all traced back to my work. The report even flagged instances where Blake had resubmitted my summaries with minor rephrasing. Blake's new title got paused immediately. The bonus money was held in escrow pending further discussion. He stopped showing up at the original location. Managers told me later he spent most days at home. Dad tried to manage the fallout. He sent an email to the leadership team framing it as a miscommunication during transition and a learning opportunity for clearer internal credit. He scheduled one-on-one talks with key staff to emphasize family unity and future growth. A few people bought it at first, but most had worked the floors with me and knew better. I decided it was time to put the truth out publicly. I wrote a LinkedIn post one evening after seeing another industry congratulatory comment under Blake's updated profile. Title: How I Built Multiple Successful Locations for a Family Restaurant Chain While Someone Else Took the Credit and the Reward. I laid it out plainly: the hours invested, the specific results achieved, the moment in the review meeting when the raise was handed elsewhere, the lack of correction afterward. No attacks, no profanity, just dates, outcomes, and the decision to step away. I attached redacted screenshots of key reports and ended with a line about valuing transparency in any future opportunities. I scheduled it for a weekday morning and hit publish. Within hours, it gained traction. Chefs and general managers I'd worked with shared it quietly at first. Then suppliers reposted. By afternoon, it was circulating in Boston food groups and New England restaurant forums. Comments poured in from people across the industry sharing similar experiences with credit shifts in family-run spots. Media picked it up fast. Local food blogs ran pieces with headlines like, "He built the empire. His brother took the credit." A Boston Business Journal did a short article framing it as a cautionary tale about succession in legacy restaurants. National sites aggregated it under broader stories about workplace recognition. Blake deleted his recent promotion announcement and went radio silent online. His profile headline changed to something generic about exploring opportunities. Dad posted a vague response on the company page about committing to fair practices and appreciating all team members past and present. Engagement was low. Most comments called it damage control. The post kept climbing trending in local industry circles for days. About a month after the post went viral, I got a message from someone I respected in the industry. Tatiana Reyes, CEO of Merino Group, reached out directly on LinkedIn. She'd read the post, followed the discussion threads, and wanted to meet for coffee at a quiet spot in the Seaport District. No recruiters, no assistants, just her. We sat down on a Tuesday morning. She got straight to the point. Merino was planning aggressive expansion into authentic Italian concepts across New England and needed someone who could execute at scale without the drama. She'd tracked my numbers from public reviews and industry reports on the Russell locations. She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a contract outline for Regional Director of Operations, base salary, 50% higher than what I'd been making, significant equity package tied to new store performance, full authority over site selection, menu development, and hiring. There was also a signing bonus and relocation support if I wanted it, though. Boston was fine. I asked why me, knowing my name was now tied to family fallout. She leaned forward and said she didn't want someone who played safe. She wanted someone who built proven results and wasn't afraid to protect them. The post to her showed principle. We talked details for an hour: target market, supplier networks. I could bring timelines for the first wave of openings. Everything aligned with what I'd already done, but with real resources behind it. I signed the contract that same week in her office overlooking the harbor. No negotiation needed. The terms were better than anything the relatives had ever offered. I started the following Monday. First priority was assembling a team. I reached out to former managers and chefs who'd left Russell's over the years for similar reasons, plus a few standout servers ready for bigger roles. Half the initial hires were people who'd messaged me after the post, eager to work in an environment where contribution actually mattered. We moved fast. Site scouting began immediately in Providence and Portland, Maine. I brought in designers for a modern take on classic trattoria vibes, locked in better vendor terms using relationships I'd built before, and rolled out streamlined training programs. The first new Merino location opened 4 months later in Providence. Opening weekend broke projections by 30%. Reservations filled weeks in advance. Reviews highlighted the food and atmosphere as the best new Italian spot in the state. Two more followed within the next quarter, one in Portland, one back in Boston's South End. Each outperformed targets on launch. Staff retention stayed high because credit was clear and rewards were tied directly to performance. By the end of the first year, the division I led had added 5 profitable sites with 3 more under construction. Equity statements started showing real value. I wasn't just surviving outside the family shadow. I was building something bigger, faster, and entirely my own. A few months and the messages started coming. Desperate ones. Dad's first email arrived on a Friday evening. Subject: Let's talk as a family. He wrote about how the operation was struggling without my day-to-day involvement, mentioned lower foot traffic at the older locations, and said everyone missed having me around the table. He ended with an offer to make things right if I'd consider consulting short-term. I read it once and archived it without replying. Mom called the next morning while I was reviewing plans for a new site. She started with small talk about the weather and Aunt Rose's health, then shifted to how hard Dad was taking everything and how quiet the house felt on Sundays. Her voice cracked when she asked if I'd come for dinner just to see everyone. I listened, said I was busy, and ended the call politely. She tried twice more that week. I let them go to voicemail. Blake's texts came in bursts. The first was a long paragraph about realizing he'd been immature, appreciating everything I'd done growing up, and wanting to apologize in person. He followed up with old photos from holidays, memories of us working the original kitchen as teenagers, even a voice note saying he'd pay back any bonus difference out of pocket if it helped. I didn't respond to any. The requests kept escalating. Dad sent a second email with rough numbers: reservations down 15% year over year, 2 key suppliers pushing for higher prices after hearing rumors. He framed it as a temporary dip and suggested my return could steady things. Mom left a voicemail inviting me to Grandpa's birthday gathering at the house in Revere, saying it wouldn't feel complete without me. She mentioned Blake was helping more now and learning quickly. I deleted them all. A former manager still at Russell's messaged me, privately. Staff morale was low, turnover spiking in the kitchens, and a couple of longtime vendors had shortened payment terms. The chain was cutting marketing spend and delaying maintenance on equipment. Nothing catastrophic yet, but the cracks were showing. Another week passed. Dad tried calling from the company line. I didn't pick up. Mom sent a text asking simply if I was okay. Blake forwarded an article about family businesses recovering from internal disputes, adding we can fix this. I stopped reading midway through each one. One evening, after a long day closing a lease, I went through my contacts and blocked Dad's cell, Mom's Blake's, and the main restaurant numbers. I turned off read receipts and muted any shared family threads that still existed. The silence on my end became absolute. For the first time since walking out, I felt the weight lift completely. Almost a year later, a contract came up for renegotiation, one I knew too well. Merino Group quietly acquired majority interest in North Shore Provisions, the main produce and specialty food supplier that had served Russell family trattoria since Grandpa's time. The deal stayed under the radar until the annual contract review notice went out. Tatiana called me into her office the day the letter arrived. She wanted me on the negotiation team given my history with their account. I agreed without hesitation. We scheduled the meeting at a neutral conference space downtown. I walked in wearing a suit I'd never needed at the family places, carrying only a slim folder of new terms. Dad, Mom, and Blake were already seated on the other side of the table with their longtime accountant. The room went still the moment I entered. Dad stood halfway, then sat back down. Mom's eyes widened. She gripped the edge of her notepad. Blake stared at the table surface, face pale. I took my seat next to Tatiana's lead counsel and opened the folder. The proposed terms were straightforward: 25% price increase across key items, shortened payment windows from net 60 to net 30, minimum order volumes raised to levels the smaller chain would struggle to hit consistently. No preferred support clauses, no legacy discounts. Dad cleared his throat first. He started with pleasantries about the old relationship, mentioned how reliable the supply had always been, suggested we could find middle ground for the sake of history. I let counsel handle the initial response. Market rates had shifted, new ownership priorities, standard adjustments. Mom tried next. She spoke softly about the impact on their margins, how sudden changes could force menu price hikes. Customers might not accept how the relatives had counted on stability. Blake finally looked up and asked directly if there was flexibility because of personal connections. I spoke for the first time. My voice stayed even. I laid out the data, current volume trends at Russell locations, projected cost absorption challenges, alternative suppliers they could explore if the terms didn't work. Every point factual, no emotion. Dad pushed back harder, referencing years of loyalty, implying the increases felt punitive. He asked if we could phase them in over quarters. Counsel repeated the position: take it or leave it by end of month. The room settled into long pauses. Mom's hands trembled as she flipped pages. Blake shifted in his seat. Dad's face reddened, but he kept his volume low. After 40 minutes, they asked for a private caucus. Tatiana nodded agreement. When they returned, Dad said they needed the supply line too much to walk away. He signed the new agreement with a pen that shook slightly. Mom added her signature below his. Blake didn't have authority, but he watched every stroke. I closed my folder without comment. Handshakes were offered at the end. I stood, nodded once, and left the room without taking any of them. The door clicked shut behind me, leaving whatever was said next unheard. A little over a year after I walked out, I stood on a big stage in Boston. The New England Restaurant Association Summit filled the convention center with owners, executives, and up-and-coming managers. They introduced me as the force behind Marino Group's rapid Italian expansion across the region. I stepped to the podium under the spotlights and spoke directly. I shared the core of it: years invested in a legacy operation the moment credit and reward went elsewhere, the choice to leave silently and build proof outside those walls. I described building from scratch again, proving results without family backing, turning recognition into real opportunity, and leading a division that outperformed expectations from day one. The audience leaned in. Then I addressed what happened on the other side. Word traveled quietly in our industry. Russell Family Trattoria lost key partnerships when reliability questions arose. Blake remained unemployed long-term. Openings dried up once background checks hit public discussions. Dad and Mom sold 4 locations to a regional chain to manage cash flow and debt. The flagship in the North End stayed open but operated on reduced days, no longer the weekend destination it once was. No direct contact ever came, no updates sought or given. The separation was complete and permanent. I paused before wrapping up. Here's what I want you to take from this, whether you're watching this video or sitting in a similar spot someday. Family isn't an automatic shield. Blood doesn't guarantee fairness, respect, or protection of your work. Too many stay in places, family businesses or otherwise, because they feel obligated, hoping loyalty will eventually be returned. It often isn't. Know your value early. Document your impact clearly. When people closest to you refuse to see it, don't waste years begging for acknowledgement. Walk out, build elsewhere, and let results speak louder than any plea ever could. Self-reliance isn't cold, it's survival. Trust has to be earned daily, not assumed because of shared history. And when you finally stand in rooms you designed yourself surrounded by people who value what you bring, you realize the real loss was never yours, it was theirs. I ended with this: I didn't just leave a job, I left a family that didn't deserve me. And if you're in a place that demands your silence to keep you comfortable for them, leave the table. Build your own. The applause rose slowly, then thundered. I stepped off stage knowing the message landed exactly where it needed to. Thank you for staying with me to the end.